good stuff. I think the biggest tip I can give you with interviewing is the same tip you've probably gotten at the outset with public speaking or anything you do in life. And that's really, it's a muscle, okay? I have a bicep. If you were to come over here and feel my bicep, it's not very big. Now, why is that? It could be because I don't exercise like I should. So that muscle isn't very big. But if I started going to the gym every day and lifting a barbell, that muscle gets big. And then if I stop going to the gym, it gets weak. And usually what happens is it gets weaker a whole lot faster than it takes to make it big. And I think it's the same thing with interviewing. I don't profess to be an expert in any way, shape, or form, but I think I've had a lot of experiences, and just because of repetition over and over and over again, some things by osmosis have kind of gone into my subconscious where I do some things pretty well as far as interviewing is concerned. Since this is a speech about interviewing, though, I thought I should ask everybody a question here. That's okay. The question I want to ask is, who is your favorite interviewer and why? And perhaps somebody wants to just raise their hand and think of somebody you watch on television, radio. That's a great point, and I think those are great qualities and why she is so good at what she does. I tried to think myself before I came here about different interviewers. I went to Syracuse University. They've got a great journalism program and a lot of great Ted Koppel, Bob Costas, all these very famous news and sportscasters went there. So I try to think of people that were great interviewers that I should reference or talk about. And the best interviewer that I know personally is right under my nose. I'm married to her. It's my wife, Christine. And she's really pretty remarkable because she's such a chameleon. And my wife has a day job. She's a radio DJ for KXDD. She does the morning show with Dewey Boynton. They're the Good Morning Gang. And so she's a country DJ and loves doing that. And she just has this incredible ability to naturally relate to people. And you know, whether she's master of ceremonies at some stuffy fundraiser, she is right there chatting it up and gabbing with people like it's nothing. And then you pick her up and you drop her right in the middle of the beer garden at the Wiley City Rodeo, and she's got a Coors Light and she's talking to some gruff cowboy and having a great conversation, and she just is so good at that. So I thought, well, why don't I interview my own wife about good interviewing skills, since she's so good at it, and I'll just regurgitate what she says and I'll look pretty smart. So I asked her, and the first thing she said to me is, well, Brian, unlike you, I actually listen when somebody's talking to them. So thought about that for a second. But then she told me seriously, and I thought, and I forget your name, ma'am, I forget. You brought up two really good points about Barbara Walters, just about how she doesn't have an agenda and she's not judgmental in her interview. And that is definitely what my wife said, the exact same thing. So I'm glad you just played right into everything I wanted to touch on today. And my wife is so non-judgmental, just puts people at ease, not threatening, and so people feel like they can trust her. And if you don't feel like you can trust somebody, are you going to talk to them or reveal anything of any emotional significance? You probably aren't. The other thing that I think she does so well is maybe it's not what she does so well, but what she has, and I think it's something that can be developed, it's a better way to describe it, is she's just a naturally curious person, and she's interested in people. And I think that's the big thing. If you want to be a good interviewer, you have to be genuinely interested in the person you're talking to. And when I say interested in people, I don't mean people in general, because I don't care how much you love everybody. There are certain people you're not that interested in talking to. It's just a fact. So find the people that you're interested in and interview them, because it's going to be a much more effective interview, because you're sincerity, your genuineness, your interest in the topic is going to be there. Your desire to prepare is going to be there. The other thing that my wife does that is, I thought, something that would be useful for everybody here is, as a radio DJ, she's interviewing people every day on the air. And she brought up another, I'm really glad we had this conversation actually last night, because she brought up another really good point. They interview a lot of musicians: Garth Brooks, Dierks Bentley, Carrie Underwood. They come through for a concert, they'll do an interview, a phone interview, and they'll be on the, sometimes it's recorded, sometimes it's live. The artist, they're doing 20 of these. They have 20 cities they're going to over a 6-week period, and it's one right after another, and they can be brutal to listen to. They can be canned and boring, but Dewey and Charlie, my wife, always do such a really good job of making them interesting and more fun than maybe what you're used to hearing. And the first thing she told me when she is interviewing somebody, she's selfish. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So you're selfish. She says, yeah, you should be selfish. I talk to them about what I want to know. Okay? Now, she is a country DJ. She's not interested in rap music or classical music. She really likes country music. She knows about the old country artists. She knows about the new country artists. She reads the trade magazines. She knows all about the industry. So what she's interested in and what's interesting to her is inevitably going to be interesting to the people who are listening. And I think that's a good, it's a simple way to put it, but be selfish. There's obviously some boundaries there. But I think if you look at the general idea, talk to people about what you're interested in about them, and that's probably interesting to other people. And again, your sincerity and your genuineness is going to come through. The other thing that she does in an interview is she tries to do something different. So if you're talking to somebody who's been interviewed a lot, a politician perhaps, somebody who likes to keep going, or is used to the same questions over and over, and they give you the same canned answers over and over again, she likes to think of something different and take a different angle. Now, she does a lot of celebrity interviews. She's not doing Barbara Walters style interviews where she's asking the tough questions sometimes. But for example, she told me the story about Dierks Bentley, who's a country artist, and he's one of these young heartthrob singers, and he had gotten married and had a child. So they had him on, and they surprised him with a baby quiz. And it was multiple choice. You know, if your baby has XYZ problem, do you use A, butt paste, B, XYZ, whatever it would be? And so it was really funny, and it really worked. And it wasn't something, and his reaction in the interview was he really had fun with it. He giggled. It almost shook him out of his trance of interview after interview after interview, because it really is a cattle call when they do these celebrity interviews. Now, I also worked in television and radio. I did news and sports. Came to Yakima in 2005 to be a news anchor, and that was a lot of fun. I am a naturally shy person. I think my wife has the benefit of being naturally outgoing. She's a lot like her dad that way. But for me personally, what I loved about doing radio and TV is, for being a shy person, it was an excuse for me, and it almost forced me to go out and talk to people that I would have wanted to talk to and been interested to chat with. And because I was also interested in people and different things going on in the community, but I might have been less likely in a different kind of career to seek that out. So to initiate, I felt like, well, I have to do the story on you for the news. So that was an excuse to have that opportunity to go talk to somebody. But ironically speaking, I don't know how much I learned about good interviewing in radio and television particularly, because that's where I worked mostly. I graduated from Syracuse University in 1998. My first job was in Bismarck, North Dakota, because I was not Ted Koppel or Bob Costas or any of the other great broadcast journalists that had passed through Syracuse. So I started somewhere very small. And when you're a reporter there, You carry your own tripod. You carry your own camera, much the way they do here in Yakima. So yes, you want to ask good questions. Yes, you want to have a nice interview. But I was more concerned about, is the camera steady? Is it white balanced? I don't want them to look like a Smurf and be all blue. Is the audio on? And you start talking, and then you have to give them the microphone because you can't hold it. You have to look in the camera. And then they start doing this, and it looks like karaoke night. So there were so many other variables that I was worried about that a lot of times a good soundbite was lost or good response was lost. And I think that's the biggest thing, is you don't want to, in an interview, lose a good soundbite or response because you're not listening or able to be tuned in because you're distracted with the elements or other things you have to worry about. So the one benefit I will say about TV and radio, though, is that you get to see yourself and record yourself a lot like you do here in Toastmasters. And every day, because I was a little socially awkward, I still am, I feel like I'm a little bit stiff. That was 80% of things in speaking are nonverbal, and I feel sometimes I'm a little bit of a robot, you know? And so I want to work on my nonverbal as much as what I say, because 80% of whatever you do is nonverbal anyway. But with TV, I would be anchoring the newscast, and I had this habit of I get going, and then I was like a little chicken, you know? And then somebody saw me after a newscast, said, "What's going on, Brian? How you doing?" You know, and then you go watch yourself. Oh my goodness! But the beauty of it is, you wouldn't sleep that night. You'd be kind of embarrassed, but the next day you could jump right into it, do it again, and kind of forget what you did and have a better experience. But when I was doing interviews, that was where I always struggled because of the whole camera situation. Or in a live situation, the news is so condensed, you have 30 seconds to ask somebody a question. Well, if you get any kind of a good response with any sort of content in it, it's got to be longer than 10 seconds. So even a live interview felt rushed and really structured. You had to coach them up so much, and you couldn't get a sincere response. So while I learned a lot just, auto-correcting because of watching myself over and over again, it was frustrating with interviews because I felt like that was a weak point for me in getting a quality interview. Where I ended up, ironically, doing better with interviews was by switching over to a sales career when I became a financial advisor, which, when I started that job, I thought, well, I need to know the stock market cold. I need to know everything about these mutual funds, these stocks, these bonds. People are coming to me for expertise, and they are. But I also have Edward Jones and an enormous amount of research backing me. So really my ultimate job is to go out and meet people and find people who could use my services, right? And then when I sit down with them, ask them questions, learn about their situation, and get them to see the value in investing with me. So as far as sales is concerned, what I loved about it is, everybody, it's an oversimplification, but everybody learns, the carrot and the stick. That's how you learn. You do something well, you get a little carrot, you feel good about yourself. The stick, you do something wrong, ow, that hurts. Well, in sales, when you do something well, you've got a paycheck, right? And then when you don't do something well, you don't. And so you learn pretty quickly. It forces you to self-correct. And I think that was the benefit of it. And, at Edward Jones, there's a saying, you've got to call 25 people a day to be successful. That's just one of the rules. I guess it's not really a saying. But you got to talk to 25 people a day. So if you're talking to 25 people a day, remember that whole muscle analogy I'm telling you about? That you're just going to get inevitably stronger. And the beauty of interviewing is you can interview your husband when you get home from work, your daughter when they get home from school. Go over, visit your mom, ask her some questions. Don't just ask general broad questions and have a conversation. Have a structured conversation. Say, I'm going to go over and talk to Mom about the summer she spent in Paris when she was in college. She doesn't know it, but I'm just going to start that conversation and ask her a lot of open-ended questions, okay? Um, the number one thing that I learned in sales, though, is the number one rule, which is the person who talks the least wins. I'm still learning. I'm still learning to do that, I should say, because I can get fired up about what's going on in the market, and you have all this information and research, and it's just blah, 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 a lot of diarrhea of the mouth. Excuse my French, but that's just what it is. And it's really a situation where you want to get the other person talking. The thing I would say that really works in my mind when I'm having a successful appointment is I think of a spotlight in the room. And when you are talking, the spotlight's on you. When the other person is talking, the spotlight's on them, okay? There was a really neat drill they gave us in training. They called it the hamburger. And I thought this is something at a Toastmasters event, maybe you do something like this already at a workshop, but the idea was this. Your client asks you a question. Now, once they do that, you compliment them, you reference what they mentioned, and then you, as quickly as possible, turn the spotlight back on them and ask them an open-ended question. So it might be something to the effect of, invest in the market? Don't you think it's too volatile to invest in the market right now, Brian? Well, Mr. Client, that's an excellent question. I'm really glad that you asked me about that. Safety is always my top priority when I'm sitting down with my clients. How would you feel about investment that's really safe and it'll pay you 5% tax-free? You see, you just spun it around, and now they're again, well, 5% tax-free. That sounds really good. Now, I'm not trying to sell anyone a tax-free bond, okay? But my point is, that's an excellent question. I'm really glad you asked me about that. Reiterate their concern, and then flip it around and ask them an open-ended question, okay? Lastly, and this was a great, two more things actually. These are two great tips I got from the advisor that I trained under. He has an office over on Castlevale, Gary Lackey, and he is kind of the sales terminator. You'll walk into his office, you'll sit down with him, and in 15 minutes he spun you around and you don't even realize that you bought something. I mean, he's that good. And so when I was in his office, it was a little bit intimidating. But Gary said he loves feel questions. And whenever I'm talking to people and interviewing them, how do you feel about the rate you're getting on your savings? I'm just using my lock, stock, and barrel questions that I use in a client or prospect interview, but you can certainly take that and apply it to your industry, whatever you're in. How do you feel about the amount of money you're saving for retirement? How do you feel about your family? How do you feel about whatever? You can say, what is your opinion? You know, what is your stance on? I like how do you feel because it's a whole lot more relaxed and conversational. So I like feel questions. And they require more than just a yes or no answer. And the who, what, where, when, why questions. Why maybe not so much, but the other four can be more informational answers, which may be what you're after, and to a degree that's what you're after. But how do you feel, or why do you want to do X, Y, or Z? Those are two ways to start a question that I think elicit a more emotive response. And that's ultimately what you're looking for in an interview. I know that when I use sound bites in television, for example, I would give all the stats and the information in the story, but I wanted the emotional response to all that information, those stats, to be the sound bite, okay? Which is why there's this big thing in newsrooms, don't talk to officials, you know, don't talk to talking heads. We want real people, which everybody's a real person. It always used to annoy me, but I understood what they were saying, which is you want to talk to people who are emotionally invested in whatever the story's about. Don't get wrapped up in the person who's the numbers person, okay? The other thing about in sales that I learned, and I'm still learning it because there's so much rejection in sales, it's just inherently a part of the business, is you ultimately just want to, when you're meeting people, you want to engage them, okay? And if you're doing an interview, you want to engage the interview, and that can be positive or negative. And negative isn't bad. It's the same as positive. They are still engaged, okay? So if you're doing an interview and you're asking somebody tough questions and they're angry in their response, but they're responding, they're engaged, that's good. And you're going to get an angry but honest response. And talking to John here, I'm sure he had a couple of angry responses to a reporter at times, right? But they engaged him, and they got a good soundbite, okay? So if you engage somebody, that's good. Don't worry about them being rude or negative to you. What Gary used to tell me is, I just make fun of him. But that's Gary. So, and he's a good guy, I shouldn't say that. But it's a hard lesson because I have this curse, is I want everybody to like me. And the bottom line is I've stood up here, and well, there are 10, 15 people here. One of you doesn't like me already, maybe two. And that's okay, but that bothers me. And if you can get to a point in your life where that one or two doesn't bother you, then I think the sky's the limit as far as interviewing and certainly public speaking. That's pretty much the nuts and bolts of what I wanted to talk about. I did dig around I just read a bunch of articles online this week for a couple hours, and I just would, on a notepad, hey, that sounds good, this sounds good, and just write a bunch of things down. So I have some nuggets here that I think in some cases are somewhat obvious, but some of them I think are really good, and I'll list them quickly, but the ones that really jumped out at me, I'll emphasize. Number one was be prepared, be informed, and I think that goes back to what I said earlier about interviewing people you're interested in. Now, sometimes you don't have a choice, I suppose, depending on your line of work. But if you're interviewing somebody about a subject matter you're interested in, or there's somebody that you're very interested in getting to know better, you're naturally going to prepare, because having a good interview, making a good impression is going to be important to you. So I think those two things kind of go hand in hand. Be early. I think that's important. I had never been to a Toastmasters meeting before. You better believe I was here at 9:30. I'm not showing up at 10:05 while you guys are doing the introductions. Then I have to apologize for 5 minutes before I start my speech. So I wanted to know how big was the room. You know, I got a nice email from Kathy yesterday saying there was 10 to 12 people going to be here, and a huge, you know, after that. I was a little chicken to ask her, I'll be honest with you. Dress the part and err on the side of being more formal, okay? I didn't know how people dressed for Toastmasters events. I'm a financial advisor. I have a business as well. Some of you are business owners here as well. I did not want to show up here in jeans and a flannel. Not that there's anything wrong with being dressed like that, because I don't know who you guys are and you don't know who I am. So I want to make sure that I at least put my best foot forward. You can dress however you want. It's your group, okay? But I don't know. So I would dress the part, but err on the side of formal. And then let me add this, be you, okay? So if you're going to interview a cowboy or a rancher, and I did that on several occasions when I was a news reporter, I would wear maybe some Timberlands, some khakis, and a durable dress shirt, but I wasn't wearing chaps and Latigo, okay? Alrighty? So you don't have to go full bore, but you don't want to be, in the jungle interviewing some animal expert or some nature person and be wearing a full suit or a dress, obviously. So it's somewhat logical, but I have seen instances where people have forgotten that logic. And I think the problem with it is, I find, because it's happened to me on occasion, is that there's so much logic and common sense to it that after a while you're bound to mess up somewhere. The other thing I would say is prep your questions in note form. I think that's a really big thing. The minute I'm looking at a script, I'm married to it. So I write it out. I rehearse it out to myself. I do that in my car on the way to go meet with a client. It's kind of silly and embarrassing. I try not to do it at the red light because somebody might look over and see me. But I absolutely do it, talk out loud, so that it's just, I'm looking down for, oh, that's the next topic I want to talk about. I'll formulate my answer. Don't interview somebody, have a structured conversation. So it's an interview, but it should feel like a conversation, or nobody's going to want to listen to it, right? You've probably heard some of these interviews and thought, boy, I've got to change the channel. I cannot listen to that. When you ask questions, ask open-ended questions. How many times do you see somebody not ask a question? Tell me about the game, coach. There's no question there. It's just, what a great game, coach. How did you guys pull it out in the fourth quarter? You were down by 10 points. That's a question, okay? So ask a question. This one is really important. Shh. Be quiet. Listen. A neat exercise that I learned at some goals building workshop over a weekend. We would each ask people about our goals and what we were looking to do. And when somebody would answer, you were required to count to 2. You could go to 5 if you want, before you could answer. So they would be finished, and then you had to wait a couple of seconds and then respond with another question. The reason is, and this is something I struggle with, is this is a funny side story, but why not, I'll tell it. I had a girlfriend in South Carolina, and she would get going, and I'm a little ADD in my personality, so she would say something, and then my mind starts going over here, well, that's interesting, and she's over here doing this, and then she'd stop and she'd quiz me. What did I just say? So we didn't work out, but that's a different story. So, but it's a good point, is that you just want to listen, and then there's so often what we do is somebody says something and you just want to add right on top of it, and that, especially if it's an interview in a public forum, maybe a panel discussion or something, you'll miss a great little bite, a great little snippet that they're saying because you jumped in before they were really finished. They need to take a breath, collect themselves, and just add a little bit more, okay? Demand clarity, focus on a topic, try and do something new, which my wife mentioned. Don't be afraid to interrupt. Use pauses and breaths to interrupt. That's a great point. Go right to the next question, even if it's off topic. They're off topic, get them back on topic with another question. Leading an interview, I wish I was good at. Boy, that's tough. If you can really lead an interview well, that's an incredible skill to develop. But don't be afraid to interrupt, and you can do it in a polite way. That's a great point. Thanks for telling me about that. Boom. Yeah, it's some sort of compliment, and then just go on to the next question, or just boom, ask the next question. And they'll just, it's like a train. You'll just kick them over here and there, and they'll just go wherever you want them. Watch the clock, which I'm going to do right now. And yeah, I should wrap up pretty soon. I think that's another thing too, is just understand every interview and subject you're talking about has a certain time frame that you really want to give it, and that people are going to be interested to hear about it. And so just kind of keep an eye on the clock. That's pretty much everything that I kind of came up with. I thought that's a lot of information, a lot to digest. I was going to look at one other I think that's pretty much it. That's pretty much everything. The last thing, and I'll just reiterate it, is just be yourself. I think that's important. Is I you can and it's sort of a delicate thing, but when I was a sportscaster, I really thought Bob Costas was the greatest sportscaster ever. I mean, he just off the top of his head can reference things and speak in such a poetic way about sport. He can make sports sound like this life-altering, momentous thing that everybody needs to pay attention to. But the bottom line is, I'm not Bob Costas. You know, he has a much bigger vocabulary than I do. He's got 30 years on me, 20, 30 years on me of life experience and sports knowledge. So I can glean some things from a Bob Costas, but not everything. I have to kind of make everything my own. So it's kind of a balancing act where you watch people who do good interviews and say, hey, I really like what they're doing there, but you're not them, so don't try and imitate them totally. Just take a little bit of what they're doing and make it your own. I think that's probably the biggest thing. And on the subject of ums and ahs, you can tell me how many I rattled up here. But here's the other thing, is when I was in college and I was at this NPR station getting my tape checked to get cleared to go on the air, because they didn't just let you go on the air. It was like making a team. And I just wanted to be a part of the station so bad. But the guy that I was working with, he was so hypercritical about every little mistake, this, that, grammar, and it can freeze you up, is what I'm saying. So it's good to try and cut down your ums and ahs, and hopefully I wasn't too distracting with that. I think equally bad or worse is crutch phrases or using repeat phrases. You know, a carefully timed and ah in an interview is okay, but repeated crutch phrases, I'm really bad with really and actually. I probably said that far more than I said and ah. I think that's worse, okay? So I appreciate your time. Questions?
I got one earlier. You were talking about when a customer would say, "How do you feel about the market?" And then you change it after what kind of class of things. It seems to me that that's kind of a manipulation.
It's not a manipulation.
If you never answer the question, but you're going right back to, is that part of the process too?
It's not a manipulation. Here's what I would say. It's an oversimplification of the idea. Because obviously somebody says, I'm concerned about the market volatility. I'd say, that's an excellent question. I'm really glad you asked. I sit down with all my clients and talk about safety. I know you're concerned about market volatility, but are you aware that the market was up 32% last year? That the U.S. markets haven't had a negative year since 2008? And oh, by the way, there's some really great value in safe investments if that's what you're, So I would obviously explain that a little bit more. But the idea of it, the drill, the hamburger, is that they ask you a question, you compliment them, you affirm what they asked, and then you turn it around in a form of a question, is the idea of it, okay? But I can see what you're saying, but it's really not a manipulation, because what you're trying to do is to get people, you're interviewing them, you're trying to get them on the track you're looking to get them on. Yeah. Exactly. But I think that's the big thing, is just that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked. Affirm it, and then ask them an open-ended question. Sure, I think so. I think well, you're talking about the Seahawks, the separation is in the preparation. That's what Russell Wilson says. He's the quarterback, right? That's his famous quote. And you know, when I'm doing my broadcast for SWX, I don't just show up at the game, grab the roster, and do the game. Oh no, I've been on all the high school websites. Somebody didn't turn their phone off. And I talk to both coaches during the week, and I have to chase them. They're teachers. They have kids. Then they're staying late, and they're coaching the team. Yeah. So I'm calling them 2 or 3 times during the week. Okay, Brian. Hey, how are you? Sorry I didn't get back to you. And then I have a list of questions that I hammer them through. You know, Coach, what are your 3 keys to victories? What kind of offense are you running this year? What kind of defense? How many returning starters do you have? If there's one thing I don't know about your team, what would it be? Okay. Tell me about this player. Who's getting recruited? I have my whole list of, tell me a little bit about your background, Coach. Did you play college ball? Did you play in high school? Did you play locally? So I just have a whole bunch of questions that I run through. Now, a lot of them I don't have to ask all those questions because I know them pretty well. But I think that's what you just have to do, is just be prepared and know your subject matter, because there's always something interesting there, you know, and you don't want to miss a nice little nugget of information that you can contribute to a broadcast with. So. Okay, that's the red. That means it's stop time. There we go. There we go.
Thank you very much.